Picture this. You're standing in the grand square of Constantinople in 1567, when the crowd suddenly falls silent. The Sultan's guards are dragging a man toward a wooden platform erected in the center of the plaza. His crime? Speaking against imperial authority. What happens next will be so brutal, so calculated in its cruelty, that witnesses will speak of it in whispers for generations. You think you know about Ottoman justice? About the empire that ruled 3 continents for over 6 centuries? What you're about to discover will shatter every romanticized notion you have about this civilization. Because behind the magnificent palaces and cultural achievements lay a system of punishment so sophisticated in its brutality that it makes modern justice look merciful by comparison. The Ottoman Empire didn't just conquer through military might. It controlled through terror, using punishment methods so horrific that the mere threat of them kept millions in line. These weren't random acts of violence, but carefully calculated instruments of state control. Before diving into these forgotten stories of institutional cruelty, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. Today we're going to uncover the 7 most horrific punishment methods that defined Ottoman justice for over 600 years. What you're about to hear isn't taught in any classroom because the reality was too disturbing for sanitized history books. The first method seems almost merciful compared to what's coming, but don't be fooled. Eye gouging was reserved for traitors and betrayers, those who had violated the sacred trust between subject and sultan. What made this punishment particularly horrific wasn't just the physical mutilation, but the calculated psychological warfare that accompanied it. When Evliya Çelebi, the famous Ottoman traveler and chronicler, documented these punishments in his 17-volume work, he described witnessing an eye-gouging ceremony in Damascus that haunted him for the rest of his life. The condemned man was a provincial governor who had been caught embezzling imperial funds. But this wasn't just about his crime. It was about teaching every other official what happened to those who stole from the Sultan. The procedure was conducted with surgical precision by executioners who had perfected their technique through years of practice. The condemned would be strapped to a specially designed chair that immobilized his head completely. Bronze instruments, heated until they glowed red, were used to ensure that the wounds would cauterize immediately, preventing death from blood loss but guaranteeing maximum pain. But what happened next was even worse. The psychological warfare started weeks before the actual punishment, when the condemned would be told exactly what was going to happen to him. Guards would describe the procedure in excruciating detail, explaining how the hot metal would feel against his eyes, how the darkness would be absolute and permanent. The public nature of eye gouging served multiple purposes. Citizens were required to witness these spectacles, not as entertainment but as education. Children were specifically encouraged to attend, learning early what their empire expected from its subjects and what happened to those who failed to meet those expectations. The blinded victims weren't simply released back into society. They were kept on imperial stipends and displayed publicly as living warnings. These broken men would be seen begging in markets and mosques, their empty eye sockets serving as constant reminders of imperial power. But if you think eye gouging was the most brutal punishment in the Ottoman arsenal, you haven't heard about their approach to enemies of the state. When the Ottoman Empire wanted to make an absolute statement about the finality of justice, they turned to beheading. This wasn't the relatively quick execution method you might imagine. Ottoman beheadings were elaborate theatrical productions designed to demonstrate the Sultan's absolute power over life and death. The case of Sheikh Bedreddin in 1416 provides the most documented example. Bedreddin had led a religious uprising that challenged both imperial authority and orthodox Islamic doctrine. His execution needed to send multiple messages. That religious rebellion would not be tolerated. That claims of divine inspiration couldn't protect enemies of the state. The preparation for Bedreddin's execution took weeks and involved the entire apparatus of imperial administration. Invitations were sent to foreign ambassadors, ensuring that news of the sheikh's fate would spread to other kingdoms, considering challenges to Ottoman authority. But what made Ottoman beheadings truly horrific was the preliminary ceremony. The condemned would be forced to participate in their own funeral rites, listening to prayers for their soul while standing beside the very block where their head would soon be separated from their body. This forced participation in death rituals created psychological torture that began long before the executioner raised his sword. The executioners weren't random soldiers, but specialists who had trained for years to deliver single, clean strokes. The best executioners achieved legendary status and commanded substantial fees for their services. The timing of the beheading stroke was choreographed to maximize dramatic impact. The executioner would raise his sword slowly, allowing anticipation to build among spectators. The actual stroke would come without warning, creating a moment of shock that rippled through the crowd and burned itself into collective memory. Battlefield beheadings served different purposes. Enemy commanders captured during campaigns would often face immediate decapitation as psychological warfare. The sight of their leaders' severed heads would demoralize opposing forces while providing Ottoman troops with tangible proof of victory. But what happened next will shock you even more. The third punishment reveals the sophisticated understanding that Ottoman authorities had developed regarding human pain tolerance. Falaka, the systematic beating of the soles of the feet, appears almost mundane compared to eye gouging and beheading, but its true horror lay in its calculated precision. Falaka was the punishment of choice for maintaining discipline within the empire's vast military and educational institutions. Soldiers who showed cowardice, students who challenged their teachers, and slaves who displayed insufficient obedience all faced this prospect. The instruments used had been refined over centuries to maximize pain while minimizing permanent injury. The preferred tool was a flexible rod made from specific types of wood that had been seasoned to achieve optimal flexibility. The goal was to create maximum impact to nerve endings while avoiding bone fractures. But here's what made it truly insidious. The technique had been developed into a precise science. The number of strikes was carefully calculated based on the severity of the offense and the intended psychological impact. Too few strikes would fail to create appropriate deterrence, while too many might cause permanent damage. The timing between strikes was deliberately irregular to prevent victims from psychologically preparing for each impact. Executioners would vary the rhythm, sometimes delivering rapid sequences followed by extended pauses. This unpredictability created psychological stress that amplified the physical pain. The recovery process was deliberately prolonged to maximize psychological impact. Victims would be unable to walk normally for weeks or months, during which time their hobbling gait would serve as visible reminder to others about the consequences of challenging authority. What's even more disturbing is how this punishment was documented in Ottoman administrative records, showing how completely systematic torture had been integrated into institutional culture. Detailed guidelines specified exactly which offenses warranted how many strikes. But even Falaka pales in comparison to what's coming next. Ottoman hanging wasn't simply execution. It was carefully choreographed public theater designed to maximize psychological impact while demonstrating the empire's commitment to maintaining social order through visible consequences. The construction of gallows followed specific architectural principles refined over centuries. The structures were designed to be visible from great distances, ensuring that news of upcoming executions would spread throughout surrounding communities. Common criminals faced relatively straightforward procedures designed to end their lives efficiently. But political prisoners and rebels faced much more elaborate execution procedures designed to maximize both their suffering and the psychological impact on witnesses. The most horrific variation involved the use of hooks or poles that would be inserted into various parts of the condemned person's body before they were suspended above the crowd. These implements ensured that death would be slow and agonizing while creating visual spectacles that burned themselves into witnesses' memories. But what happened before the execution was equally disturbing. Victims would be informed days or weeks in advance about their approaching execution, during which time they would be encouraged to contemplate their crimes through carefully managed religious observances. The crowd management during hangings shows sophisticated understanding of mass psychology. Guards would be positioned throughout crowds to monitor reactions, prevent riots, and identify individuals whose responses might indicate political sympathies requiring investigation. Bodies would typically be left hanging for specified periods to reinforce the finality of imperial justice before being removed for burial. The sight of decomposing corpses swaying in public squares served as constant reminders of what happened to those who challenged the Sultan's authority. Yet hanging was considered merciful compared to the permanent mutilation that's coming next. Ottoman amputation served multiple purposes that extended far beyond simple punishment. It created permanent visible markers that identified criminals within society, while serving as constant reminders about the consequences of challenging imperial authority. The crimes that warranted amputation were carefully categorized. Simple theft might result in the loss of a hand, while repeated offenses could lead to the removal of multiple limbs. Rebellion against authority might result in the amputation of feet, ensuring that former rebels could never again pose military threats. The medical procedures had been refined over centuries to ensure victim survival while maximizing psychological impact. Ottoman physicians developed techniques that minimized blood loss and infection risks, allowing amputees to survive their punishment and serve as living warnings. But here's what made it even more cruel. The tools used were specifically designed to achieve clean cuts that would heal properly, while creating maximum psychological impact during the procedure itself. These implements were maintained according to strict standards that ensured consistent results. The social integration of amputees followed carefully established patterns. Former criminals would be assigned specific roles that accommodated their disabilities, while ensuring that their permanent disfigurement remained visible to others as ongoing warnings. What's particularly disturbing is how the economic impact created additional layers of punishment. Disabled individuals often became economic burdens on relatives, creating resentment and social pressure that reinforced the deterrent effects of the original punishment. The documentation in Ottoman medical texts provides disturbing insights into how systematically these punishments were studied and refined. Detailed anatomical drawings and procedural descriptions show how completely human dismemberment had been integrated into imperial systems. But amputation was considered merciful compared to what's about to come. Of all punishments in the Ottoman arsenal, emasculation represented perhaps the most psychologically devastating attack on individual identity. The removal of male genitalia wasn't simply physical mutilation, but complete destruction of masculine identity within a patriarchal society. The crimes that warranted this punishment were carefully selected. Sexual assault, adultery with women of higher social status, rebellion against imperial authority, and various forms of political treason all could result in this ultimate form of masculine punishment. The medical techniques had been refined over centuries to ensure victim survival while maximizing psychological trauma. Ottoman physicians understood exactly how to remove male genitalia while minimizing blood loss and infection risks, allowing victims to live with their punishment for decades. But what happened during the psychological preparation was arguably worse than the physical procedure. Victims would be forced to contemplate the complete destruction of their masculine identity weeks before the actual punishment. This extended anticipation often caused psychological breakdown before any physical procedure occurred. The social reintegration of emasculated men followed established patterns that emphasized their permanent status as social outcasts. Former men would be assigned roles traditionally associated with women or eunuchs, creating visible reminders of their punishment. The economic implications created additional devastation. Men who could no longer reproduce represented, lost lineages, and destroyed family hopes, creating emotional and economic consequences that extended far beyond the immediate physical results. Studies of emasculation victims conducted by Ottoman physicians provide disturbing insights into long-term effects. Former men showed consistent patterns of depression, social withdrawal, and complete submission to authority that demonstrated the effectiveness of this punishment as political control. But even emasculation was considered merciful compared to the slow agony that's coming next. Impalement represented the pinnacle of Ottoman cruelty, a punishment so horrific that its mere threat could prevent rebellions across vast territories. While often associated with Vlad the Impaler, the Ottomans perfected this technique and used it systematically to crush resistance. The crimes that warranted impalement were reserved for the most serious threats. Major rebellion, repeated treason, assassination attempts against imperial officials, and large-scale sedition all could result in this ultimate punishment. The technical procedures had been refined over centuries to maximize suffering while ensuring that victims would survive for extended periods before dying. Ottoman executioners understood exactly how to position stakes to avoid immediate damage to vital organs while creating excruciating pain that would continue for hours or days. But what made this even more horrific was the preparation process. Condemned individuals would be informed weeks in advance about their approaching fate, during which time they would be encouraged to contemplate the extended agony that awaited them while listening to detailed descriptions of the impalement process. The positioning during procedures required extraordinary precision to achieve the prolonged death that made this punishment so effective. Stakes would be inserted through specific parts of the body to avoid immediate death while ensuring maximum pain and slow destruction of internal organs. The public nature served as the ultimate expression of imperial power. Crowds would be required to witness these spectacles, which often lasted for days as victims slowly died while mounted on stakes that displayed their agony for all to see. The selection of sites reflected careful consideration of symbolic factors. Victims would be displayed in locations where they would be visible to the largest possible audiences, while their prolonged agony would serve as constant reminders of imperial power for weeks until their bodies decomposed. What's most disturbing is how medical knowledge informed these procedures. Physicians would advise executioners on optimal stake placement to ensure victims would remain conscious and suffering for the longest possible time before finally dying. As we've journeyed through these 7 methods of Ottoman punishment, a clear pattern emerges. Each punishment wasn't simply about inflicting pain or ending lives. They were carefully calibrated instruments of state power, designed to send specific messages while maintaining the complex relationships that held the empire together. The progression from eye gouging through impalement represents an escalating scale of terror that allowed authorities to match punishments precisely to crimes, while ensuring that every level of society understood the consequences of challenging imperial authority. The public nature reveals how completely the Ottomans understood the connection between spectacle and political power. Every execution, every mutilation, every act of state violence was choreographed to maximize impact on witnesses while creating lasting memories that would influence behavior long after the spectacle had ended. The medical and technical sophistication demonstrates how systematic cruelty can become when it serves institutional purposes. The knowledge required to perform these punishments, while ensuring desired outcomes, required decades of study and practice that created specialized expertise in human destruction. Modern analysis provides important insights into how institutional violence operates within authoritarian systems, and how systematic cruelty can become normalized when appropriate checks and balances are absent. If this glimpse into history's hidden darkness has left you wanting to uncover more buried truths, I've prepared another journey into the shadows of the past that you won't want to miss. Click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another shocking chapter that history tried to erase. And if you found this exploration as compelling as I did, hit that subscribe button so we can continue peeling back the layers of history together. These forgotten voices deserve to be heard, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told.